So Father Tim got away on Monday morning for vacation, which is good news. That means that his shoulder was doing much better. I just got back from vacation a week and a half ago, and while I was away, you had all that crazy rain here. I missed all that, all the flooding. Meanwhile, ironically, I'm in Saskatchewan complaining about too much sunshine, right? Just blue skies and sunshine. So I was like, Lord, could you just kind of balance this out a little bit for us? That would be great. But I had a very good vacation, got to visit a lot of family and friends and spend a lot of time on the farm. But when I was traveling back here, I met this Catholic guy who likes to get T-shirts made with those clever faith sayings on them, and then he gives them to his Catholic buddies and tries to get them to wear these as T-shirts. And one of the humorous ones said, "I've decided to let God handle things, because if I handle things, I'll end up in jail." Right? That's a statement of faith, right? I've decided to let God handle things. It's a mark of conversion, a deepening of faith. And now think of the moments in your life where you came to that point, like really deciding to let God handle things, right? That those were moments of your faith deepening. And perhaps they were moments of great joy and being overwhelmed by God's love and goodness, and you were just kind of swept away and couldn't help yourself but just surrender it to the Lord. Lord, I just give you everything. You handle it. Or perhaps they were moments of difficulty, right? Coming to a point where, Lord, I can't do this anymore. Lord, I don't know what to do about this. Lord, this is beyond me. You handle it, right? And that's more similar to that punchline that I'll end up in jail, because it speaks of difficulty, it speaks of desperation, and it reminds me of when we hear that people hit rock bottom and then come to faith. Then they come to a point of turning everything over to the Lord and deciding to let Him handle everything. And one of the reasons for this is that when you hit rock bottom, you get humbled, right? A person is humbled, and it takes humility in order to grow in faith. It takes humility to grow in our reliance on God. It takes real humility to let God handle things. The Catechism of the Catholic Church defines humility as the virtue by which a Christian acknowledges that God is the author of all that is good, right? And recognizing and acknowledging that God is the author of all that is good, not me. So in this definition, humility is not so much about recognizing how lowly we are, but recognizing how great God is. And it's humility that enables us to really recognize how great God is. Humility underlies our faith that says, I've decided to let God handle things. Humility enables us to focus on God, who is so beyond us. Now, pride does the opposite. Pride focuses everything on ourselves, building up my kingdom, protecting my ego, my reputation. Right? Pride is being concerned about presenting a certain image of ourselves to others. Pride is about my will be done, and pride pulls us away from God. Humility, on the other hand, opens us up to God. Humility pulls us towards love of God and love of neighbor. In our gospel, Jesus praises the Canaanite woman's faith, saying, "Woman, great is your faith." But we recognize that under her great faith is great humility. Canaanites and Jews were enemies. So for this woman to be near Jesus, following after him, was humiliating enough, let alone the fact that she was shouting out loud like a crazy person in a crowd trying to get Jesus' attention, right? That was humiliating for her. Yet she's not humiliated, right? There's no pride there. She's humble before the Lord because she's not focused on her ego, her reputation, her social standing. She's not focused on herself. It's all about her daughter and her healing. And love for her daughter drives this woman to humble herself before Jesus, right? She goes before him. She calls him Lord. She kneels down before him, right? A posture of reverence and submission, acknowledging his lordship. She's acknowledging her dependence on him. She's recognizing Jesus as the source of good as she calls out for his mercy. This took great humility on her part. And it fits well with that definition that I gave you from the Catechism, that humility acknowledges that God is the author of all that is good. So what does Jesus do in response to her great humility? Not what we expect, right? Jesus pushes her buttons, right? Jesus tests her faith. Or as some put it, Jesus elicits an even greater act of faith when he says to her, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." This would have been how Jews would speak about their relationship with the Canaanites, but it wasn't exactly edifying, was it? And Jesus is actually being kind of harsh here. And she could have easily been insulted and turned away in a huff, but she doesn't, right? Her humility shines through. She has truly decided to let Jesus handle things. And only in great humility could she come up with such a faith response when she says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Isn't that beautiful? Just so simple, so humble, right? That's the opposite of pride right there. And humility it takes great humility to respond with great faith when we're being tested. Right? You've probably noticed this in your own life, right? The moments of testing, right? When something unexpectedly comes, a difficulty unexpectedly shows up, you're thrown for a loop, whatever, our faith gets tested, right? In those moments, we often discover how strong or weak our faith is. Right? For some, they're surprised at how strong their faith is in the face of difficulty. And so this is a good sign that there's humility at work. But for most of us, we are surprised at how weak our faith is in these moments. But this is an opportunity for us to grow in humility, to be humbled by how weak our faith is, to accept it and to desire to grow in humility and faith, right? Because all of us need to grow in humility, right? So unless you're the Blessed Virgin Mary, you need to grow in humility. And there's different ways to grow in humility. Of course, beseeching the Lord for that grace is the first thing we should do, but also when we take time for personal prayer. It's often an opportunity to grow in humility because when we're trying to enter into his presence, enter into the silence and listen to God's voice, if you're like me, often you're surprised at how distracted you are, right? And how we get off, how unfocused we can be. But again, when we bump up against this is an opportunity to accept ourselves as we are and to grow in humility. About a year ago, Father Brian used the Litany of Humility in one of his homilies, and many of you found it a powerful prayer. When trying to take this prayer to heart, it's a real opportunity to grow in humility. For those of you who weren't here, there's just a little handout available after Mass today, or if you've lost your copy of the Litany of Humility, and it's also easy to find it online. But one of the lines in the litany says, "From the fear of being humiliated, deliver me, O Jesus." From the fear of being humiliated. In order to grow in humility, we must be humbled. Right? In order to grow in humility, we must experience some form of humiliation and accept that. Right? So remember the example of someone hitting rock bottom and coming to deep faith, or the example of the Canaanite woman in today's gospel. She did not fear humiliation, and she came to great faith, really relying on Jesus to handle things. So we want to be inspired by her example today as we desire to grow in faith, right? Desiring to have great faith is a sign of humility. Pride would say the opposite. It's like, no thanks, right? My faith is good enough as it is. I don't need to grow in faith. I don't need to be humbled, right? No, humility is necessary for us to grow in faith. It takes humility to decide to surrender and rely on God. It takes humility to decide to really let God